Welcome, everybody. I'm Catherine Wygant Fawcett, the Executive Director of the Institute for Family-Owned Business. We're just letting people come into our program here this morning, so we'll start in a minute or two. So hopefully the sun is starting to shine in here where I am in Booth Bay. I don't know if others people are having sunshine or cloud, but might have snow tonight, so that's always exciting. Well, I'd like to welcome everyone. As I said, I'm Catherine Wygant Fawcett, the Executive Director of the Institute for Family-Owned Business. I want to thank you all for joining us. I want to thank Key Private Bank for being our title sponsor today. We have Tony who will speak with us in a few minutes. And thank you to Maine Biz, the HR Convention, and the University of Maine Graduate and Professional Center for also sponsoring us today. As many of you know, the IFOB is a nonprofit that helps family businesses succeed. And we typically offer over 50 programs ranging from our awards to our educational and our social events. We work with CEOs, we work with the women in family business, we work with the next generation, and we work with leaders in transition. And we have two of those participants here today with us on our panel. And we've adapted our programs to go online and some in person this year. Our next educational Zoom will be for our women and family business, lessons learned from COVID-19 and calming chaos. That is next Thursday, November 5th from 4 to 6 p.m. with Elizabeth Ross Holstrom from Mindful Employer. And she'll take us through this program. Very interesting because we may or may not know who is our president, and it's going to be nonpartisan, but we're going to be calming and seeing how we all feel about COVID and where things are right now. Our first in-person and Zoom combo, well, it really isn't because in the past we used to do that, but we're going to make it more inclusive with our Zoom, will be our next gen's affinity group. We're going to go play Family Feud IFOB style. So hopefully you all have gotten our survey. We want to say survey says, so we can find out what our IFOB family world thinks about family business. It's on Thursday, November 12th from 3 to 5:30, and it's at the Woodlands in Falmouth or in Zoom. And it's a chance for you to learn about our next gen affinity groups and have some fun. So you can register online at www.fambusiness.org. And to fulfill our mission to support local family-owned businesses, the IFOB board and staff are offering free family business memberships for the remainder of 2020, and we've opened up our affinity groups. So if you're interested, please join us for that. And we've muted everyone and turned off your video so we can focus on our great speakers. We'll also be recording this program for later viewing. We want to make this interactive, so please put questions and things in your chat, and I will come on and I'll relay that to Jim, who's leading our program. And today we have Jim Lyon from Summit 9 Consulting, who has worked with our panelists, the father and daughter team, on their succession plan. And we have Deirdre Wadsworth, president of Hardypond Construction. Wave, Deirdre. And we have Bob Gaudreau, vice president and project manager from Hardypond Construction. And towards the end of the program, we'll be putting a link to the survey in our chat. Please fill this out for us because it helps us build our programs. We'll also be sending it up in our follow-up email. And I'll now turn it over to our presenting sponsor, Tony DeSoto, Senior Vice President, Market Leader from Key Private Bank, to say a few words, and then he'll turn it over to Jim. Thank you.
No, thank you, Catherine. And my words will be very brief so we can get to the meat of the meeting and over to Jim. But I just wanted to thank you, Catherine, and the Institute for this how-to series and really being extremely flexible over these last number of months to deliver this in a different way than originally intended. So I really appreciate the work that you and the team have done. And we're certainly proud to continue to be a sponsor with the Institute and specifically this how-to series. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the session today. And with that, I guess I'll be brief and I will turn it over to Jim. So thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Morning, everybody. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Catherine. And a big thanks to Bob and Deirdre for agreeing to come on the program this morning and share their story and what it is that they've gone through over the last 6 years, I guess Bob was just pointing out, during the whole transition period. So very much appreciate you guys joining us this morning. And of course, thanks to everybody who's joining us here on a very foggy morning. I wish I was in Booth Bay where there was sunshine. That's not true in Yarmouth yet this morning. So succession planning in family businesses is obviously a very wide topic, lots of different things that we could cover. So I made 3 simplifying assumptions this morning to start narrowing things down a little bit. The first is that I'm assuming that you own a business and you want to pass it to somebody else, that you've reached that point where kind of done, check the box on that one. The second assumption is that there is a next generation in your family who wants to own that business, wants to own it, wants to run it. And the third assumption is that you believe they successfully can. So if those 3 assumptions fit you, then this program will hopefully be very useful for you this morning. What we're going to discuss is a framework for thinking about when and how to transition that business to the next generation. And of course, we're fortunate because we're going to hear a firsthand account, both from Bob, who passed the business, and Deirdre, who took it over, about how that journey went. And so we will do that. And then the third thing that we did is we provided a workbook, and you should have seen it yesterday. It's not intended to be a workbook to work through this morning, but it's something rather that I hope you'll go back to at the end of the workshop this morning, and it will get you started and thinking about how and when you want to make that same transition. So again, this is a workbook that was designed just for this program for a family-owned business who is trying to pass it from one generation to another. If that doesn't match your situation, you may find you need a different workbook. But anyway, that's what that one is all about. What we aren't going to discuss this morning are all of the nitty-gritty technical details of how to set up family boards of directors and trusts and tax minimization strategies and a whole host of very technical details, because it's 8:30 in the morning and that kind of stuff is really kind of dull. And second, because every situation is so very different that you really need to hire an expert in order to really get that stuff right. So we're not going to dig deeply into that stuff, but instead we're going to talk a lot about the things that are common, that most of us have to deal with in passing that business. Which does bring me to an important point, that the complexity will vary in your transition a lot depending upon the type of structure that you have. And there's basically 3 scenarios that we encounter. One is sort of the owner-operated model where a single owner or a couple owns the business, runs the business, controls the business. So there's a lot of people who have that situation. Second is kind of a family partnership where there might be multiple family members who all share in controlling the business, managing the business, and enjoying the profits and proceeds of it. And then the third model, of course, that we run into is a more distributed model where there might be multiple family members who are in ownership. Some of them are employees. They're at different levels within the organization, making different decisions. And of course, compensation varies significantly. If you're passing the business from one owner-operated model to another, then congratulations, your path will be much simpler. But any other scenario, whether it's going from a partnership back to owner-operated or owner-operated to distributed or distributed to distributed, things get much more complicated, much more quickly. So again, what we're going to try to do today is talk about things that are common across all of those different scenarios to make the content relevant to as many people as we can. Whenever I start talking about exit planning with clients, whether they're family businesses or not, I always point out that you always have the option, instead of doing some exit planning, to just die and let somebody else clean up the mess. Your spouse, your business partners, the state, the banks, somebody will have to come in and clean it up. I assume that by participating in this workshop today, that that's really not the plan that you want to follow. But in the spirit of Halloween just being a couple days away, I want you to just stop and think for a second or two. What is it that would happen if, according to your estate and to your will, if you don't survive to the end of today? Just take a second piece of scratch paper in front of you and write down what would happen to your business according to your will and estate, or lack thereof. And I talk about this because Bob points out really accurately that the process of creating your estate, the process of going through and creating your will, really is very much like the process of succession planning. You have to start thinking hard about who's going to own the business, who's going to run the business, operate the business, control the business, and how you're going to balance the estate and distribute the estate across your various heirs. And so if you've started that process, congratulations. The succession planning process will be a lot easier. If you haven't started that process, you may want to as soon as you can. In fact, there are some people who have pointed out that the difference between succession plan and an estate plan is that with a succession plan, you get to stick around and see if you do a good job. And we all want you to do a good job. So that's what we're going to be trying to dig into today. Once you start working on your succession plan, if you haven't already, you're going to discover right away that it is an inherently very emotional experience. In fact, many of the emotional triggers that we all have are going to be tripped once you start working on that succession plan. Money obviously becomes a really big issue, and everybody wants to start talking about who gets it and how much. Control becomes a big issue. Who controls, who makes the decision, how much flexibility do they have, etc. Family relationships start to get involved, of course, right away. We all remember every slight that our older brother or our big sister committed when we were a young teenager. And it's our opportunity to get revenge or whatever it is that's going on in our mind. Or, of course, we remember that mom or dad loved one of us more, and we point to all kinds of things that come out of that. And so it all triggers, of course, back to perceptions of fairness and security and identity. And so, of course, we mix all of that in to a succession plan, a big boiling pot. And of course, many things could go wrong. And so that's what we want to work on. To guide through that, I have sort of 3 principles that I believe will make the process simpler for most of us. The first is that the departing generation carries the bulk of the responsibility to decide the outcomes, to decide what it is that they want, how they want this to proceed, what the future should look like, and how they want things to unfold. And it's important that they invest the appropriate amount of time and energy into thinking that. They've grown hopefully a really great, successful business, and now need to put the appropriate effort back into saying what happens to it now. The second principle is that after those decisions get made, then their advisors can get to work. The accountants, the lawyers, the counselors, coaches, whoever, can start to figure out how to put the pieces into place to make whatever it is that that departing generation wanted come true. And the third principle is that if you do two before one, you're going to spend a lot of time and a lot of money running in circles. And what I see often is ownership who really struggles in figuring out what it is that they want, the outcomes, the ways that they want to navigate the emotion, the ways that they want to pass the business on to the next generation. And so in lieu of working through those very hard decisions that only they can answer, they go hire lawyers and accountants and have the lawyers and accountants really start jumping in and getting to work, which is great, except the lawyers and the accountants can't really figure out the hard decisions. So really important that we work on principle one before we work on principle two. So figure out what it is that we want and then engage the experts to bring stuff in. So we're going to talk about succession planning today as if it could be divided into two simple phases, a getting ready phase and a doing it phase. The objective in the getting ready phase is to put obviously the pieces in place so that you can be really successful. In thinking about those pieces, the challenge always is for the departing generation is that you're trying to balance a host of seemingly, in some cases, contradictory priorities. Trying to balance the security of your immediate household, the financial security, and what it is that you're going to do with your time and how you're going to enjoy your life. Trying to balance that with the security of adult children. Some of your adult children may be in the business, some of them may not. And as parents, we all want to see them thrive and do well. And so in our departure from the business, that starts to become a prominent consideration. We also, in balancing priorities, have to think a lot about our estate plan and our sense of fairness in how we want to pass that. The business has a value, and if we give it to some of the children, but not all of the children, what does that mean for the rest of our estate? And how do we choose to, if we want to, try to create some sense of fairness and balance in there? We also have to think about relative business contributions. Some of the kids may have worked more in the business than others. So how do we recognize their individual contributions and allow them to enjoy potentially the wealth that they've created as a result of that in different proportions? Most departing business owners are also very worried about the company's well-being. And they want to set up in some way a system or path for the business to continue and have a strong legacy of some sort. And of course, then there are lots of other commitments that you may have made or that are important to you in your community, to other employees, or to other stakeholders in your organization or around your organization. And you're trying to, as you craft the succession plan, balance all of that and come up with a guidebook, a guide program and series of documents and guidelines and rules that will accomplish all of this. So it can be obviously very daunting. So I try to organize it into a few pieces that we can tackle. The first is in that getting ready phase is really thinking hard about your own personal plans. And if you look at the workbook, you'll see that I spend a lot of time right at the top on that. I think it was in Alice in Wonderland that the Cheshire Cat said something to the effect to Alice that if you don't know where it is you want to go, then any path will get you there. And I suppose the corollary to that is if you don't know where you want to go, then you might as well sit and stay where you are. And that's the challenge that I think a lot of departing business owners have, is that they don't invest enough time in thinking about where do they want to go next? What is it that they want to do? And if you haven't invested that time in doing that, there's a real risk that you're going to become a pain in the succession because you just don't leave. And so it's really important that you get excited not only about the fact that you're leaving something, but more importantly, that you're getting excited about what you're going to, that you've crafted for yourself a real vision for what life looks like when you've departed the business, and that you've shared that vision with your spouse, your kids, and anybody else who can help hold you accountable to it, so that you will have the proper motivation as the time comes to get out the door, so that you don't become that pain in the succession. The second area that you want to start working on are your real expectations for the future of the business. Now, some departing owners just can't wait to get out, and their philosophy is, hey, it's the kids' problem now. Let them figure out what to do with it. And that's fine, right? But if that isn't you, then it becomes really important that you start to lay out what your expectations are for the business. You need to write down and share your vision for what the business should look like, or what you hope it will look like, say 3 to 5 years after you've left. You need to think about and write down and share the cultural values that you think are important in the business and that you hope will continue on as you depart and go do something else. You need to think hard about how you want the business to be a family business, and how you want family to be treated in the business, what opportunities you want for family members who come into the company, how you expect or anticipate that different family members will get to enjoy the fruits of the business and all that it provides. And then you need to think hard about how you want that business to be governed. What are the big decisions, and how are the big decisions going to be made? And by taking time to write all of that down ahead of time before you leave and laying out your plans for the business, you can start to have conversations with the family who will be taking over, and hopefully create a vision and plan that everybody can agree with and document that says this is where we're trying to go. The next area that you need to work on is your financial plan. Your financial plan always begins with that mythical number that's, gee, if I just have this amount of money, I know I'm set for the rest of my life. So this is where you work hard with a financial planner to get as close as you can to figuring out what that number is, and then thinking hard about where that number is going to come from. And if there's a gap between how much money you have currently saved, either in retirement accounts or in other assets, if there's a gap between that and how much money you currently have, then we have to start looking hard at the business and how much money is it that you need to get out of the business, which could come from selling your shares of the business, could come from consulting fees that you charge the business for the value that you continue to bring for now or for 10 years or for the rest of your life. Or you could in fact choose to be an employee of the business and in some way come back and work and just have a job, but a job within the company that you really enjoy. So it's critical that you have that financial plan, and that financial plan considers all the things that you want to do within your financial life, the money that you want to pass to heirs, to charities, etc., so that you have as big a picture as you can. And it's why it's so important that you work with a financial planner who can really understand you and really craft that plan with you. I figured out. Related to that, but slightly different, is a value that you have to make about the selling price, if any, that you want for the business. There are some examples where you just want to give the business and move on, and you can afford to do it, and that's fantastic. But there may be other philosophies and reasons why you choose to have your kids buy the business from you, where you just feel like it's the right thing to do, that you've built this, or where you feel like they ought to have a little bit of debt because it'll make them work harder, or some other element that's driving you and why you believe what you believe. This also starts to a lot of times just get into ego. And is it important to you to have some recognition of the value of the business that you've built? And you want to recognize that and have that passed. And then the last point is what I call family first in the getting ready phase. And I group these into the 3 C's: connection, communication, and compassion. Because let's face it, this is a family business. And the world is full of stories. In fact, in our area, if you've been reading the news in the last 2 years, of family businesses and families that fell apart over the tension and stress related to succession. And so there's 3 C's that I think about that try to prevent that stress from bubbling over to the point where the business starts to fail and the family starts to fail. The first of those is connection. How do you create meaningful connections with all of the family members who are important to you, who work in the business and those who don't work in the business? Connections that are part of the company, fine, but also connections that are outside the company. What are the things that you do together as family that have nothing to do with the business and that create bonds that are much stronger than whatever it is that's going on in the business? So investing the appropriate time in establishing those connections, really, really crucial to a successful succession. Communication is the second C. Communication is all about you taking the time to really think hard about your hopes and dreams and expectations, and then sharing them, talking about them at the appropriate time, and then writing them down and making sure everybody can read them and also understand them and have time to react to them. Communication is also about trying to lay some ground rules about when we talk about the business and when we don't. Right? Can we talk business over Thanksgiving dinner or not? It's not a right or wrong answer there, but by laying out ground rules and expectations and trying to say, when do we address these things, you can get everybody on the same page and make it much easier for everybody. And then the third C is compassion. And this is the ultimate test of your emotional intelligence and whether or not you're able to figure out and understand the perspectives and interests of all of the parties, your employees, your children, and anybody else, your spouse who's impacted by this. And as you're making these succession planning decisions, if you're able to show the compassion that they really need, the empathy that you really need to show to their perspective. And somebody I know who did that really well is Bob Gaudreau. So let me introduce Bob, who's going to tell you about his path and journey on this as he started to pass the business. Bob?
Good morning. I guess thank you for that intro, Jim. And I'd like to give you some background information very quickly. I started the business in 1990, basically a recession, worked my ass off, and the business has endured to today. And my daughter is in in and finalized in succession. But during that overall time, it's back in 2005. The word for me, and I'm 65 today, was the discussion of you got to look forward on what your retirement's going to be. And I said, you know, I'm going to live to infamy. You know, that's no doubt. It's easy. But, you know, 2005, the word started coming up, retirement. And you know, at the time, we moved forward and, you know, didn't think twice about it. 2006, my daughter finishes AmeriCorps, and unfortunately we had a death in the company, and she stepped in as a business manager. Never anticipating my daughter having any desire to put up with her dad, because I had abused her in her youth, because I made her go to work for me during the summers off from school. So naturally, I was probably on DHS's list most of the time. But in 2008, we started talking about her thinking about wanting to own the business, which, you know, guess what? Up to that time, our will between my wife and I basically shut down the business, divested of the assets, and it was over with. So as Jim spoke earlier, the will became a very direct understanding of where we were going with a succession plan, because at one time the value was nothing except for maybe 10 cents on the dollar is what the assets were worth if it were to be shut down. But so it gets to the next point of, you know, we've got to change our will because there's a new direction. Deirdre gets and hires Jim because, you know, things are progressing in approximately 2014. This is good news. I don't understand it at the time, but, you know, okay, she wants help because her father's not probably assisting enough for her liking, or that she's gobbling it up with all the energy she has, and she needs more to make sure she understands it all. It comes to 2014 that we actually initiated a plan. So, wow, you know, 2005 to 2014, Bob sure didn't do a whole lot. It was on the subject matter, but not a lot happening. And here we are in 2020, the end of 2019, we actually completed the succession plan. And I now have got a label at Hardypond, but I actually work for free. So you're going to start to equate my financial considerations here very quickly. Just now to kind of discuss the financial side of this is, naturally, as Jim spoke, there was an ego value. There was, the company's worth 3 times the value of what my successive profits were over the last 3 years. And oh man, it should be worth millions and millions of dollars. And how is she going to repay me? And let's figure out that plan. Well, you know, I can have an ego just like the best of us. And I thought I'd worked hard enough that I deserved some of that. But then reality kind of sets in because my wife, actually, Deirdre's mom, who, let me give you some background on her as well. She has a JD in estates and trusts and senior living and such. So she has an MBA and she's a CFP. She's a certified financial planner. So to say that we don't have more sitting in the nucleus of the Gaudreau Wentworth family, I'd be amiss to say that there's an awful lot of educational value sitting around the table at any one time. That said, you know, I had to come to my reality of figuring out where and what I was going to do, and the economics, the baby I had created, the baby's new life beyond me, and the training and mentoring I felt that Deirdre needed to obtain to be able to feel that she could handle the company with my reduced roles. all that kept happening. And the outcome of it, let me put one item aside very quickly because it's the financial piece. I talked about retirement. I talked about the value of the company to my wife. And then Deirdre, you know, when I wasn't around, would talk to Dorothy on the backside saying, why isn't dad getting his act together? And this is what I want, I assume. And this went on for a number of years until my wife finally took the 2x4 to my head and said, it's not about you. It's about your daughter. She's unable to plan forward, and you need to get your act together to assist the momentum of this event. It did pretty much happen fairly quickly after that point that I started to detail, as Jim say, my desires in a list of items that were important to me for consideration of this transition. I will tell you, my wife wasn't sitting there at the table dictating this, but Jim, Deirdre and I all sat down, and I was given homework, and we started the process. And that went back and forth for a little while, but we eventually came to a plan. And the succession plan is really me wanting to make sure my daughter had the wherewithal to get there from here and to make the best of her new opportunities. It wasn't about me defining her opportunities or me sitting and pushing her buttons for the rest of her life. It was about making sure she had the wherewithal. There was a list of importance that I had to go into retirement or to fade away. Those happened. I wanted a smooth transition. I wanted an involvement level. And there was one other one that was pretty important, was what happened if Deirdre didn't succeed or Deirdre died, and now it was part of her estate, and there was a buyback process to be involved, so that if I wanted to come back into the business, I could let that proceed. So a lot of things around a will really transcend the process of succession planning. Those important things played out, and we did come up with a plan. The transition, you know, basically there was a gifting of shares over of 5 years. There was a salary determination for me and a reduction of hours per year, and basically some payments into the future that I can take advantage of on some insurances, and her providing me office space and paying for my phone and car expenses and stuff like that. Pretty light duty when you took finances or the financial piece out of this whole consideration. So I don't mean to make it easy, or it is easy for an owner to operate or transition, but we took a lot of things out of the table, and the importance was success of the business for my daughter. And that said, you know, that we're at that end of it. I will tell you adamantly, there is trials and tribulations at all levels and always will be. That's the dynamic of what we do and where we came from. So now we're talking about retirement. Bob's part of this list that I came up with was, what am I going to do? And, you know, originally, you know, 15 years ago, didn't know except for I wanted to have fun. Didn't know what my new life was. I felt I was having fun enough with what I was doing that this was good enough. So be it. But I've started about 4 years ago volunteering 1 day a week, full day for a concern, Harpswell Aging at Home. And I'm doing similar work. We're helping seniors stay in place, keeping them warm, safe, and dry. And it's, you know, I'm a contractor. I know some of this stuff. I can help. That's beyond the other already volunteered processes or concerns I'm with. But it's very, it gets me out there. I'm involved. And I have a good time at it, and pretty rewarding from the standpoint that people can benefit from my background. Deirdre, in a way, pays for some of that volunteer time because I'm out there using some of the company's tools and stuff. The new company and where I'm at, basically today, as I say, I have an office space within her concern. I'm there, I'm hearing what's going on, and sometimes I'm asked for information and sometimes it's none of my business, and I've got to deal with that. I help at any stage or opportunity I can, but I otherwise stay out of the way. It's not my job. I do receive quarterly dividends because I am still a remaining sub or minion. And that is a reward enough for me. And I did go and start a new company, Hardypond Development, which I go and build stuff. And yeah, she gets the construction work in most cases out of there. So I've found a new niche. I've labeled myself and reinvented it. And I think my daughter is doing a tremendous job. And a lot of that has been with Jim's help and people around us. We've got a good group of bankers and accountants and, you know, people that really make a difference when you add it all up, of making sure you talk to them and move that needle forward so that there is a succession plan. At this point, I'm kind of fading into the sunset. I'm keeping myself very busy with my development work. And getting myself in trouble in other ways. And my daughter doesn't need to deal with me anymore, I hope. So I'm going to leave it at that and turn it back to Jim, I believe.
Great, thanks, Bob. Catherine was going to field questions if there were any questions for Bob before we kind of continued. I appreciate, Bob, your sharing of the story. You pick up even on the simplicity, you know, that we talked at the beginning about the owner-operator model and how the owner-operator model being transitioned from one owner-operator to another owner-operator is the simplest of the versions. And this is the scenario that Bob has. But of course, simpler does not mean simple. And so Bob talked about a lot of the emotional challenges for himself that he had to go through, wrapped around his own identity and the value of the business and what he anticipated that the business would happen to the business, as well as what his hopes were for Deirdre and trying to figure out how to help her be successful with it. So that was the simplest of our scenarios, and even that is not simple. So, yeah. Catherine, were there any questions coming up?
Yes, we have a question from Steve Tenney, who says, what has Bob learned from Deirdre as an operator?
That she's more capable than Bob.
Okay, we have a couple other questions. What would you do differently, Bob?
Wow. I would have probably started this a lot earlier. Honestly, once the plan was put in place, it was relieving to myself and my daughter. And you've got to understand from the standpoint, my daughter's life was on hold until I came up with a plan. And she's a young, vigorous lady and with a family behind her, and they're asking questions. I was stymieing their ability to move forward. And when you take a look at it from that standpoint, that boy, those are bigger responsibilities than being an owner. That's your family, and when you're holding up progress, you need to get your act together.
So we have a question from Andrew Reed. Did Bob align Deirdre with an operational mentor beyond himself?
No, not really. Maybe she may be able to answer that. Maybe there was others, but I would say my wife, Dorothy, there was a lot of chatter. I will tell you, this was not brought up at the kitchen table. It was not an acceptable thing to do. And but I think there was a lot of back and forth that Deirdre had with Dorothy, and that was very helpful because, again, she had educational benefits that neither Deirdre or I had.
So was there ever a time when you weren't seeing eye to eye?
Oh, yeah. Please, as I said, there can be turbulence, and it's usually financially. There's so much that, the construction company, we base our ability to exist on getting paid just like anybody else. And the company can play banker, or you can pay with the money that people owe you. And I'm sure there was a time or two that I lambasted my daughter. There's no doubt about it.
Okay, we have another question from Nicholas Enrique. If evaluation was part of the process, can you please explain how the family dynamics were impacted by this?
Well, in this case, the financially, Hardypond had a profit sharing plan and had a basis of which I've as a senior member of that plan, was getting a greater value out of the profit sharing plan step up. And so there was really adequate funding already in place, and that's reduced the ability for me to say I needed to be funded through the company. And equally, I had other companies, so it didn't really need to be funded through the construction concern. Again, it's a simple. Unfortunate people are looking for basis of how they might be having or wanting to sell their business, and mine and Deirdre's probably was simply the most.
And how did you remind yourself to step away?
My daughter. Again, you gotta look yourself in the face. As number two, I mean, yes, successfully, the company is still operating just fine. I can help, but she needed to do what she needs to do, and I can only assist or support. And it was better for me, honestly. Again, I would recommend highly to anybody to get started sooner. Use Jim as a resource to get some of the baseline stuff out of the way, and then get to your attorneys and other people. In the construction concern, we had an additional hiccup in transition because the company needs to be bonded to do public work. And they look to me as the funds because I was the old money, and they're looking at Deirdre as the vulnerability with no money. So we had to transition this very carefully to make sure they were always in tune. And so beyond talking to the bankers and other entities, the bonding company equally was a big piece of this, that they needed to be incorporated at all times.
Okay, I don't see any more questions at this time, so I'll turn it back over to you, Jim.
Great, thank you. And thanks, Bob. It will be really interesting in about 6 or 7 minutes to hear Deirdre's side of this. For those of you wondering, I don't think Deirdre has heard what Bob was going to say this morning before this. So she may have some interesting comments that she may have just changed her presentation in a couple ways. So again, thank you, Bob, for sharing.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So, and I talked about this as it being in 2 phases that we're going to talk about, the getting ready phase and then the doing it phase. Everything that Bob went through, of course, was the getting ready phase. How he started to think about and plan for the succession, as well as what it was that he wanted to go do next. So now I want to touch for a few minutes on the doing it phase. And I like to break this down into kind of 3 groupings. There's the management of the business, the day-to-day operations, and how you execute the business that you're in. There's the ownership of the business, like who owns the shares or who has membership in the LLC. And then there's the governance, which I like to think of as making the really big critical decisions for the success of the company and of the family. Those three things are what need to be passed in the doing it phase. The good news is that they're all different. And so we can separate those three things and pass them on a different timeline and in a different way to meet different objectives that you may have. And so again, this starts to be where it's really more important to get those lawyers and accountants involved, consultants and the like, to help you really separate what your objectives are for each of those so that you can then execute it. I want to talk a bit about the management piece and how to transfer the management piece. One of the things, if you opened up the workbook, you'll see is I've got a whole list of skills and capabilities that I challenge people to start thinking about. How is the next generation prepared to take over this company? And start to evaluate them, do a performance review, if you will, in terms of their capabilities. Because it's really critical, if they're going to be successful, that they have what it takes. So I want you to think about, when you're passing it, do they understand the strategy of the company? Understand really what it is that sets you apart and makes your business going to be successful? And can they think strategically? It's remarkable how many times I see a business owner who's departing and wants to pass the business to their kids, and the kids may not have ever had an opportunity to really run something, to really be in charge of something, to really think about something. And one of the critical skills that they've not developed is the ability to think strategically, because they've never had to before and never been in that situation where they really needed to do the hard work of thinking through a problem and figuring out how they were going to navigate their way through it. So be really thoughtful about, as you're passing it to that next generation, can they do that? And if they haven't yet done it, then how are you going to give them opportunities to develop that skill before it really matters, before they're on their own? So strategy. Sales and marketing, critical for the success of most companies, of course, is the ability to, in some way, generate leads and then to get out and sell them and close those leads. So think hard about, do your kids, do that next generation, do those heirs, whoever it is you're trying to pass the business to, do they know how to sell? Do they know how to market? Do they know where the business is coming from? Then the operations side, whatever it is that you do they know tactically all the little details that make the business run and make it work? Because if they don't, that's a hole that somehow needs to be plugged. I also encourage you to think about their financial management and whether or not they understand how to read their balance sheet, how to build the budget, what's going on the P&L, and whatever the key metrics are that you use to evaluate the success of your business, do they understand those? And then finally, leadership and management. Most small business owners discover as they start to grow that one of the biggest challenges that they're ill-prepared to deal with is managing and leading people. Because managing and leading is hard, right? It's hard to be always the person that people are looking towards. It's hard to create the infrastructure and the pieces that you need in order to keep a whole team of people moving in the right direction. So it's crucial that the next generation that you're passing this business to have as many of these skills and capabilities and experiences as you can give them. Now, depending upon the size of the business, obviously you can hire for some of these skills, right? Often we have an accountant on staff, a CFO, perhaps, if the business is large enough. not uncommon that we might have somebody who runs sales and marketing or operations. So if the business is large enough, clearly we don't have to have our children be expert in all of this, but they need to understand enough about it. And if you are in that situation where you're going to be dependent upon other employees to lead some of these critical roles, then it's crucial that you're making sure those employees want to stay. That as you lead, that their loyalties aren't with you, but that their loyalties are to the company and to the next generation. And that they are committed to trying to help make the business work. But there are also a couple things that you can't hire for, that you really want to make sure that your successors are prepared to take over. One is their ability to manage themselves. Have they created the discipline that they're going to need to be independent, to think, to analyze, to work hard, and to really apply themselves for the success of this company? Also, have they earned the respect of the other stakeholders that they are now going to be working with, either leading, if there are other employees or customers who they will be dependent upon to continue to do business with, vendors that they're going to have to do business with and buy from. Really important that they've had the opportunity to really earn the respect of those constituencies so that they can be successful. And then lastly, vision and goals. One of the things that I always push new owners, new successors in a business on is, what is it that they want to do with the company? It's back to the Cheshire Cat, I suppose. If they can't answer that question, I get really nervous. It's all well and good that the departing ownership built a great little company or a great big company. And it's great that you have, as a departing generation, created some vision and goals and that you've communicated what those are. But what I want to hear from that next generation coming up is how they're going to make the company even better than you did. What are they going to do next with it? And you should be listening for that as well, and trying to make sure that they have a drive and an ambition and something that they want to do. Because the worst possible scenario, frankly, is when somebody takes over the business because they feel it's an obligation, or because they feel that they just get to, and they just want to be a shareholder and a placeholder on the place in the business. So we really want them to be wanting to do something with it. So how do we help them get there? There's a lot of different tools depending upon what it is that you need to develop within them. One clearly is external training. Of course, there's colleges that we can send people to, but I'm really talking here about targeted training programs, of which there are many in a lot of disciplines, online and offline, in order to shore up their skills. Taking that finance for non-financial managers class is probably really important. Learning a little bit about leadership and management through a variety of training programs that are available is very crucial. So thinking hard about where the gaps are in their training and creating the opportunities and pushing them out to go train is really important. Another area that I think is critical for developing the next generation is to give them a real job. Maybe even a job where they don't report to you, but they report to a non-family member. Right? A job that actually has real accountability. It's great that they come in and shadow you for a time and sort of learn, but they also really need the opportunity to own something, own a piece of the job that's theirs that they actually have to do and finish successfully. And often it's good if they move around. If your company is large enough so that they spend a time in operations, they maybe spend some time in marketing, maybe they're in the field selling for a bit, but give them different experiences so that they have different jobs and can really understand the business. One of my favorite jobs to put people into is in a sales job. There is nothing like having to be a sales rep for you to learn about working hard, working independently, dealing with rejection. Well, heavens knows we all get rejected plenty of times. You got to learn how to manage that. You learn the product, service. You learn how to build relationships and connect with people. You learn how to win and how to succeed and how to celebrate that. And then how to wake up the next morning and get back out on the street and go find the next opportunity. So if it's appropriate in your company, putting that next generation into a sales role before they go anywhere else can be a great learning opportunity. You can also use coaches and mentors, people like me, and of course there are many others who can really come in and work with that next generation one-on-one, help them understand all of these things that we've been talking about and figure out what it is that they need to develop and help them develop it. Two last points. One of the techniques that I love to do with the next generation is have them create the budget. There is no better way, other than the sales role maybe, but to really understand the way the business works than to have to create the budget. And ideally, you'd give them a big piece of paper and a pencil and maybe some reports and say, okay, go write the budget. Because there's something, I don't know, educational and cathartic about writing numbers down and using the calculator and figuring out, okay, if we sell this much and this is what it costs us to produce it, and we have this much gross profit and this is our overhead. The process of doing that and really trying to create that model is educational in its own right. So having that next generation create the budget is a really valuable exercise. And then the last bit that I'll say on this is don't make it easy. Do not solve all the problems. Yes, they're your kids. Yes, you love them. Yes, it's family. You want them to be successful. All of that is great. And they need to struggle. You need to give them a job and a responsibility and have expectations that take them out of their comfort zone and make them sweat. Because by doing that, they learn the resilience and they learn the lessons. And if you solve all the problems for them, then they're not going to learn. So with that thought on struggle, why don't we hear from Deirdre and hear how great her transition was.
Thank you, Jim. So I did learn a few things in my dad's presentation there. I was sufficiently laughing through at least half of that. So my story is, as my dad alluded to, I grew up in the business. He started it when I was in 3rd grade, and I got to spend every holiday, summer vacation, whether that was just riding around in the truck with him as he went to different job sites and checked in with people. And then as I got older, I spent a lot of time as a laborer pushing a broom. And he would drop me off at a job site and say, you know, to our superintendents, keep her busy, make her useful for 8 hours. Here's $10, make sure she gets lunch. And that was a lot of my summers. And so yeah, I didn't love it. It was not an enjoyable way to spend your teenage years. A lot of my friends had, you know, a job as a lifeguard or the ice cream shop, and that sounded a lot more fun to me. But when it came down to it, I got some other jobs, and I learned some other things. I went away to college, studied business and economics, came home, and then did a year as an AmeriCorps Vista in Portland, and then ended up back in the office as the office manager and running sort of that side of things when they needed a little bit of help. And I stayed. I haven't left. So that was 2006 when I came back full time. I got an MBA early on, and in that process of getting my MBA, I used the business as my test case for every paper that I did. And through that process, I learned that I love the business side of the company. I didn't love being in the field as a kid. I still don't. I don't get a lot of the satisfaction out of physically building something that a lot of the people that are in the company do. But I love the business side of it. I love the strategy of it, and I love the people. And so we started having these conversations about what if I stayed and became a project manager, and I enjoyed that process of working with the owners and the architects and our subcontractors, and that management process I really liked. And what if I just stayed and did that for a few years until I figured something else out, and then I just kept staying. And at that point, we said, okay, maybe I should just stay for good. So that was in 2011, we started our succession plan, and literally the plan was very simple. Transfer 10% of the ownership every year. 10 years, we'll be done. And so we got to that point, and it started happening, and I really felt like we hadn't hashed out how to do this, other than, this ownership piece was being transferred, but I didn't feel like I was gaining the skills I needed. And I was looking at it in 2014 when I ended up hiring Jim, but I was getting anxious about the process, and was I going to be ready to really take this over and run with it in 6 years? And I didn't feel like I had those skills yet, and I wasn't learning enough by being a project manager and learning the construction side of it, which was extremely important, but it wasn't all of it. And so we brought in Jim, and the things he was just speaking about, sales and budgets and all of that. And we started working through that process at the same time, working through the process of, what do I want the company to be? It doesn't have to be the same company as my father created. We can have different objectives. There are different things that get me excited than did him. And so we needed to meld the company moving forward into what made me happy. And so we've done that incrementally. So, Jim was really helpful to me in organizing that process, and then organizing my dad and I into what we wanted. How do we create new roles for ourselves? How do we move? How do I gain the skills that I need to feel confident? How do I gain the skills that he feels confident in me and he can leave? And we sort of picked away at those over time. We did, and then we made the plan a little bit more succinct. So we came up with new job descriptions. We started saying that my dad was working less. He wasn't actually working any less, but he was supposed to. He had a different role, and he was focusing on that. And it just kind of melded together. And there were certainly times when I would feel like it wasn't going according to plan, or he was feeling like it wasn't going according to plan, and there'd be some stress around that, and there were some hard conversations. And one thing that I think has been challenging for me, and I think a lot of people would say in family business is challenging, is that you're in a family business, that the family that you grew up in, but as the next generation, I was also creating my own family. And so I had to be really cognizant of the difference between the people that my parents and the people that I lived with growing up, and their expectations and what they were expecting from me, and what my family was creating and what we were expecting, both for our kids, as we were having young kids, and what we wanted for our future. And how is this business going to give me what we needed, both in terms of security for my family and, just what we wanted to do for fun and finances, and all of the pieces around what it means to own a business and the risk that's associated with that. So I I came into this, with some strengths around the business side. At this point, I had an MBA, I had an undergraduate business degree, and I learned a little bit about the construction, but that was my weakness, right? And so I stayed actively involved in that, and that still is my weakness. And I just have sort of come to realize that I hire great people and I rely on them, and that's also been a learning curve, is learning how to hire great people that fit with my weaknesses. And so Jim has helped me through that. My dad has helped me through that. And there have been some struggles along the way for sure. And I think one important thing that we learned is, like Jim kind of just noticed, is that I got to practice. So my parents had this dream of having a house in the Caribbean. They ended up building that, and they started taking longer vacations. And so that meant for, in the beginning, it was they would leave for 2 weeks and I would be in charge for 2 weeks. And then it was a couple months, a year. And I remember I still will get pretty nervous, like, as he's leaving. But it was in those months where I was running everything, and I was the one, if someone's going to knock on the door, they're coming to me, not him, that I got a chance to practice being the final decision maker, really running the show, and, sort of feeling what that anxiety around being what the one in charge was. And it's been good practice for me, because as we're ending the succession plan, I don't have a lot of anxiety around that. It's more excitement than anxiety, which is, I think, where we're supposed to be at this point. And I also believe one of the major challenges we've had, and I think probably a lot of people do in passing to the next generation, is our employees. So we've had a lot of employees that have been here for a really long time, and they knew me as a kid. They knew me as somebody they had to babysit in a lot of cases when I was in elementary or middle school. And I had to figure out how to change their perception of me, how to be a leader for them, especially in the case that a lot of them are significantly older, and how to earn their respect as a woman, obviously, but as somebody that was signing their paycheck, and someone that they trusted to make good decisions in the company, and work with our projects and make sound decisions. Not be risky, have them feel confident that I was doing the right thing. And that was very hard. And then I think the other hardest piece of all of this has been communicating. So in family business, there's always a lot more emotions tied to whatever you are communicating. And anytime that we didn't feel like things were going the way that we wanted to, most of the time it was individually for me or my dad individually for him, it became a way that we had to get over that, right? We had to sort of be the bigger person and have that conversation, make a meeting, sit down, hash something out, write that hard email that, it needed the follow-up afterwards to say, how are we moving forward? How are we going to do this? Here's what I need. Here's what you need. Let's figure it out to get to a point where we don't feel like we're both losing, because we hit those points. And a lot of it was about just how do we get beyond that and come to conclusions where we both feel comfortable. And we've been able to do that. It's kind of, now that we're 10 years into this, and at the end of the plan, it's a little amazing that it all has happened as seamlessly as it has. But I think with a lot of help and the incremental steps that we've done along the way, it's been easier than it certainly could have been. Not without challenges, but definitely we came up with a plan, and then we executed the plan to the best of our abilities and amended it as needed. And so that's sort of our story. And I certainly appreciate some of my dad's comments earlier about, yes, I use my mom as a sounding board, and we both did. And even though she didn't want to be any part of that. But I don't think she had a choice, and she realized that too. So I'll leave it up to questions now. If anyone has any questions for me. Or back to Jim.
So I just put in the chat if anybody has any questions for Deirdre. We had one that said plan stalled. How'd you get it on track? But you seem to answer that in your piece here.
Yes, yeah. It was. We did have a year where I had gone to the majority ownership, but we hadn't. Then we skipped a year and didn't move ownership the following year, and I was feeling very kind of not. I guess hurt would be the right way. Why aren't we doing this, and why isn't it moving forward? But at the same time, once I sort of stepped up and we had those conversations, really we just hadn't figured out the rest of the plan, and we had a miscommunication about what was that plan. And so we needed to figure it out, and we came up with a new plan. We moved forward and we made it happen, and that was the way to get through it.
Okay, I don't see any questions in the chat. We have questions at the end, so I will toss it back over to you, Jim.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we'll definitely have questions in just a couple minutes. There's just a couple more things that I wanted to point out about the doing it stage, and then we'll turn it back to Bob and Deirdre as well. The last two things that you have to pass, right, management being the first, are ownership and governance. And there's kind of good news and bad news about the ownership and governance piece. The good news, I suppose, is that this is where your accountants and your attorneys earn their money in trying to figure out all of the right ways to do everything and all the nits and gnats and tie everything up and put the agreements together. The bad news is this is often where really the emotion, if the emotion hasn't boiled up yet, this is where you're going to start to see a lot of the emotion, because this is where we're really getting into a lot of issues around money and control. And so it starts to get very real at this stage. The ownership transfer piece is usually, on the surface, seems like it should be pretty easy. It's, just you figuring out the terms of the transfer. How much money do you want, if any, and under what structure? And there you go. Here are the shares. That's balanced a little bit by tax issues and whether or not it makes sense. There are certainly some scenarios where it makes more sense for the departing generation to actually own the business and let it pass through their estate at the end. But I promised you we wouldn't get into those kind of nitty-gritty details this morning. So the ownership piece, really important that you, from a tax efficiency perspective, that you really work with the right people to help you put that into place at the right time. What's important to understand, though, is that ownership doesn't necessarily mean control. They are not necessarily the same thing, because you always have the governance piece. Governance is the infrastructure that you set up that oversees the really big decisions. So the strategic changes for the company, whether there's a merger or an acquisition, or whether there's a certain amount of capital expenditure where they have to come and get governance, if you will, to approve it before they're allowed to move forward with it. So the big decisions can be managed through governance. Leadership changes are managed through governance. So succession, of course, but any other major leadership changes that may need to be made, as well as holding management accountable. So accountable typically to the financial results or to other core tenets of the family. And so governance in a family business typically looks like one of these. Either there's none in that model where it's just an owner operator who has complete control, then there may be no governance at all. They just do whatever they please. Or you may choose to set up a situation where the departing generation provides some period of governance and some formal approval has to be granted before they can do certain things. Or it may be appropriate in your situation to set up a family board of directors, or even a board of directors that's a mix of family members and outside the family members. So there's a lot of different options for doing this. And again, your attorneys, your accountants will help you figure that out. The last piece, both Deirdre and Bob spoke about this, is that you really need to build a timeline for yourself. Define a schedule, share it with people. That schedule can reflect differently for the management, the ownership, and the governance. For each of those, there could be phases. Deirdre talked about how she had management responsibility for 3 months because Bob was in the islands, and then he'd come back, and then he would take over more of the management stuff. They created a phased ownership change where he was gifting a certain number of shares over the course of 5 years. So she went from being a minority owner and he was being the majority to over 5 years, that flipping, right? So you can get very creative in how you pass all of these. But what's important is that you create a plan, create your timelines, lay it out, separate it into phases, and then share it with people and figure out an accountability plan. Who's going to hold you accountable so that you don't become the dreaded pain in the succession? And when it's time for you to go, you go. One of the keys for all of this to make it successful is to create those regular meetings. So if you're within a couple years of exiting the business, there should be monthly succession meetings talking about what is it that we're doing, what do we need to learn, what are the next skill sets, where are we concerned about the ownership, and what's changed in the tax law, what are we doing with governance, what are the skills that the next generation needs to learn, how are we keep creating new experiences for them, etc. And then in the last year, those meetings might even be happening every week. Really important that those meetings are just about succession, so that you're holding yourselves accountable and you're making the continuous progress that you need to make. So that's the formal part of our presentation. I want to invite Bob and Deirdre back in. And again, thank them, but see if there are any other questions that the three of us can answer about the process and how to be successful.
Thank you all very much. We do have another question from Steve Tenney. He said, what skills of your father did you most appreciate as you worked into your current role, Deirdre?
Most appreciate. So I think where we started was he had been doing this for so long that he knew the finances very easily. He had his own, financial benchmarking tools in his head. And turns out like we needed to put those both, I needed to put those down on paper to be able to learn them, but I needed to roll things back to be able to learn them sort of for myself and create my own. So that was one of the first things I think that we did that was really important. He was able to, look at cash flow monthly and just know where things were headed based on a couple of things. And I didn't have that ability because I hadn't seen it for 20 years. And so that was interesting for me to learn to just see, okay, that could be me in 20 years, but it's not right now. And then generally, my dad pretty much knows everyone. So there was a lot of, just transitioning some of that, the relationships and, his skills around construction. And, we're kind of known for taking on some odd projects and things that could be more challenging. And, those relationships and those skills that he has to sort of to think outside the box on project-based work are really important, have been really important to our company. And I don't see him getting relieved of those duties anytime soon. So we'll keep him around at least to bounce ideas off him for a really long time.
Okay, we have two more questions. We have one from Margot Burnham that said, are there any instances in which part of the succession plan is that the founder has a sort of pension rather than a buyout or ongoing fees to work?
I'll take that. And Bob, you may have something you want to add as well, but definitely, right? Depends on your situation, but absolutely, that's an option. The challenge that you want to have, and it's real, that you want to try to avoid under that scenario, is that if the departing generation who takes the pension lives for another 25 years, as the children are now trying to actually have their own succession plan to another family, they still have this huge liability to another generation away. And honestly, there are times where you start to wish they would just hurry up and pass on already so that you didn't have that liability, which is not a pleasant scenario. So you really want to be thoughtful in how you create something like that, but it absolutely is done.
To add into Jim's comments is, yes, some of that was thought out and considered. We also looked at that being a liability on Hardypond's balance sheet into the future, which when you're trying to impress your accountant and your bonding company of your wherewithal and without liabilities, you don't want to have something hanging on that is going to cost you and could be an unknown. As Jim states out, it could be 20 years, it could be 10. But the fact is, it'd be easier for you to possibly buy something, an insurance plan, or some other means that is $1,500 a year, but it does Y. There's other opportunities to dial into that.
That's a great point.
Okay, we have two more quick questions. One is, do you have a board you needed to work with also, family members and independent board members?
We don't. So I don't know if it was actually said, but I'm an only child. So that sort of added into the ease of this, that there weren't multiple siblings to deal with here. And we're a relatively small company. And so it was really just the two of us hashing out details and coming up with our plan and working with our advisors. We have a great attorney and accountant, the bonding, like all those people that we've worked with for a lot of years. And we use them to help us, but nobody that we had to answer to, which was great.
Okay, and one quick question from John Beauregard. How did tax planning affect the structure or timeline of the process?
I'll let you go, Bob.
Well, the tax planning, we weren't going to control when and how this was going to happen in that what year, what specific valuations and sorts. The company is afforded the tax consequences, let's say it that way. If that's the best way to say it, I think.
Hey,
I guess what I would just add is that I don't really, the details of their situation, of Bob and Deirdre's situation, very different from anybody else's situation. And that you really need to get good advice from an accountant and from a tax attorney to really figure out the right path. And then, of course, what you really need is the Congress and the president to actually keep the tax laws the same for an extended period of time so that your planning actually works out. So if you can figure that one out, please give me a call.
Okay, that's a nice segue into our program that we're having next Thursday about how to calm the chaos and learning with lessons in COVID and all of that. So I did put the survey link out for everyone. Please take that survey for us because it helps plan our programs for next year. Thank you to Jim, Deirdre, and Bob. Happy birthday. We didn't know today was birthday, so yay. Happy birthday to you. And our sponsors and all of you for attending. I hope everybody has a great day, and we'll be sending follow-up email from this today. So thank you all very, very much. It was a great webinar. We really appreciate it. Have a good day. Thanks.
Catherine.
Hi, thank
Bye-bye.
you.